Welcome, everyone. I'm Charlotte Gibson, president of Charlottesville Now. Welcome to Charlottesville Now's January chapter meeting. Thank you for being here. And now on to tonight's program. Welcome everyone who's just joining us for the Plight of Afghan Women. Thank you to the Action and Programs Committee, especially to Kristen O'Donoghue for putting this fabulous program together. Note that this program is being recorded and will be posted on CVille Now's YouTube channel in a few days. We are extremely fortunate to have as our first guest tonight, Rhongina Hamadi. I hope I said that right. Ms. Hamidi was born in Kandahar, Afghanistan. In 1981, she immigrated to Pakistan and then to the USA with her family. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia in religious studies and women and gender studies. Ms. Hamidi returned to Afghanistan in 2003 and took up residence in Kandahar. For 2 decades, she worked tirelessly to better the lives of Afghan citizens through development projects, advocacy, and most importantly, education. Examples of her accomplishments include the establishment of a full value chain model for an all-women's social enterprise in Kandahar, whose products have reached Europe, the Middle East, Americas, as well as other parts of the world. In this endeavor, Ms. Hamidi designed and implemented a holistic and full environment approach to bring value to Afghan women at each part of the value chain. Ms. Hamidi successfully led the Mezan International School to integrate and implement a world-class and internationally accredited curriculum with a solid foundation of Islamic education, Afghan history, Afghan values, and multilingual education. Most recently, she was Minister of Education. Ms. Hamidi is well-versed in child development, educational psychology, educational management, Islamic pedagogy, curriculum, business administration, development in conflict-affected countries, and gender issues from an Islamic perspective. She has contributed to numerous publications and radio programs, including Times Asia Magazine, The Globe and Mail, Der Spiegel, Business Week, The Guardian, The Telegraph, NPR, BBC, and Voice of America. Her latest publication is a book that she has co-authored entitled Embroidering Within Boundaries, Afghan Women Creating a Future. Welcome, Rangina Hamadi.
Good evening, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you, Charlotte, for extending this invitation, and I'm happy to see a long time friend, Ellie Smeal, who will also be speaking with us tonight. And it's good to reconnect with the Charlottesville community that I was once part of many years ago, gosh, more than 20 years ago. I won't bore you with sharing a lot, and thank you for that introduction. You said way more than you needed to. But, you know, just as an Afghan American woman, and I know that the topic of Afghan women and particularly Afghan girls is and remains a hot topic today. So I'll just share a couple of my points, but I would love for anybody to share questions, send me questions, because I would like to have a conversation and a discussion on particular things that you all are interested in rather than me talking from my point of view. But what an incredible journey I have had from the late 1990s when I was a student at the University of Virginia. In fact, writing my thesis at the Women's Studies Department about the Taliban and the women's movement in Afghanistan at that time. As a young Afghan American woman in her 20s, I desperately wanted to go to Afghanistan to experience firsthand the reality of what the, not reality, but the reporting of what was being shared with us at that time, to see firsthand if those, the information about how the Taliban treated women was actually true. But I guess fate at that time did not enable me. And when after September 11th, Afghanistan became the topic of conversation globally and most particularly in America. And when the US especially decided to go into Afghanistan on October 5th or 6th, I believe, of that same year, that natural calling of wanting to do something for my country, for my people, and most importantly, for the women of Afghanistan, it was a natural calling to go back. And I went back thinking that I was going to be engaged in the community work of helping women, most especially focusing on economic empowerment of women in Kandahar, Afghanistan, which is my parents' birth home. I did not know that I was going to commit 20 years of my future life to my country and to my people. And today I sit here with an incredible amount of pain, agony, frustration, words that I don't have meaning, or emotions that don't have a particular word to describe, still trying to understand what happened and why did we allow, why did the world allow to hand over a country and a population to the very enemy that America and the world fought in 2001. Recently, I read an article that is published by an assistant professor at UVA, also an Afghan American, I believe, by the name of Helena Zeweri, who, along with another Afghan American professor from Temple University, wrote about the movement of the plight of Afghan women historically. And they both actually point out a very important element, which is often excluded from the popular narrative that we hear on television or through newspapers, which is that women's plight or the women's movement or the attention to women's emancipation or work did not start in 2001, and it hasn't ended in 2022 or on August 15, 2021. There's a history, even though a history that it might not be so actively appreciated by historians among the Afghan women populations living in Afghanistan, but there was a progressive yet a slow-paced movement for women's inclusion in the broader society in Afghanistan up until the communist coup of 1978, when the monarchy was toppled with a communist regime that continued. On the surface, at least, there was a lot of hope that women's rights were a big component of the narrative of the communist regime by giving the rights on the surface of women, promotion in universities and schools, high schools, the forced revealing of women's hair. Many women were forced to take out the headscarf, and we've seen this kind of appear in many other Islamic societies, where the headscarf or the burqa becomes a tool for those who, either taking it off or putting it on as a means to emancipate women or do the opposite. So while we have the image of the Taliban putting the burqa on, covering the women, taking the face and the identity away from women to be against women's emancipation and women's liberation, you have the opposite movements of communists or other movements that forcefully take off. And I remember studying this very phenomena in my women's studies classes, that women's bodies unfortunately are used, women's agencies are used politically by various regimes to propel or define their agenda. And interestingly enough, it's not very different than the Bush administration's plea or call to the American public in 2001, when the whole premise behind going after the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, backed and supported by the Taliban administration at that time, the whole idea was to go after the Taliban to liberate Afghan women. The burqa, I remember when I was a student at college and the university, the burqa became the symbolic of the Afghan women's movement globally, particularly in the US, to liberate Afghan women, from the powers of the Taliban and other conservative elements in the society. And so, yes, America went, and the burqa was never really enforced in the past 20 years, and it still isn't, at least up until now. The Taliban still claim that they haven't reinforced it, officially yet, at least in writing, although many women are putting it back on for their own safety and protection, for fear of being persecuted. The burqa was somehow lifted from women in major cities. However, it's still a shock for me that that same country, the United States of America, went in to liberate women, but 20 years later, enable the environment for the Taliban, the very elements that we went to liberate women from. Perhaps I'm being subjective about this, but kind of handed over power of the Afghan government back to the same elements that were against women in the early 2000s. And just in a quick nutshell of what has happened to women in the past 20 years of Afghanistan, a lot has changed. The number of women educated far exceeds the number of women historically who were educated with bachelor degrees, master's degrees, and some even getting their PhD degrees. The number of women or little girls coming out to schools across the country has increased in numbers that historically has never been a reality in Afghanistan's history. Women were coming out to the workforce, working in a variety of sectors, of private sector, the NGO sector, government sector, far more women in lower positions. But towards the end of the past 20 years, we did see women being appointed to positions, of course, still not at the rate that we would have wanted them to be, but nevertheless, there was that effort to include women at in higher positions, including myself serving as the Minister of Education after 30 years, being the first female education minister after 30 years. But unfortunately, my term was very short-lived, of only 14 months exactly on August 15th. So there was a lot of progress made, but at the same time, we cannot neglect and forget that everything was beautiful, that everything was, wonderful. A lot of the progress was heavily located in major city centers such as Kabul or Mazar or Herat. Women living in the districts across Afghanistan and various provinces out, far away from Kabul, not much changed for them. And I would urge all the participants here to read the article written by Anand Gopal for the New Yorker that came out right after the fall of the Afghan government, called "The Other Afghan Women." It's a very nice look at the issues that the ordinary Afghan women living outside of the cities faced in the past 20 years. And we cannot neglect and forget about the problems that those women saw and how they were affected by the constant violence of night raids and gunshots and bomb blasts, from up above. And so women, there was a class of women on the one hand where they were the success stories that played a huge role in promoting the cause of women's emancipations and women's progress at the city level, but at the rural level where women's education and women's workforce was never really a reality in the past 20 years, they have a different narrative that unfortunately didn't get as much ears as it should have. So just to sum it up, all that, a lot has changed today in Afghanistan, and the unfortunate reality that the government has been handed back over to Taliban, the terrorist group that still has a majority of their leadership on the most wanted list, globally, but yet you do have countries like Norway who are officially inviting these terrorists to come and meet with government officials. And there's, obviously the conversation is ongoing about whether the world, particularly led by America, still wants to recognize this government or not, while the country is facing a devastated humanitarian crisis with a broken financial system now and no jobs for people to earn money and earn a living. So the devastation is there, but the narrative that the majority of Afghanistan wanted the Taliban to be back in power, I want to tell you and share with you very clear and loud that that was never the request of the Afghans. But this has, the coming back of the Taliban has been a clear and a direct result of horrible and bad international politics and policies that have now ended handing over a whole nation, 35 million plus men and women, back to the hands of terrorists that America went to fight against 20 years ago. But, our fight doesn't end. As things may be looking very bleak all over the world. I am happy to share that the women of Afghanistan today are not the women of 1995 and 96 when the Taliban came to power, some 25 years ago. We have women who are educated, who are advocates, who are speakers. They're now located globally, and they're very courageously facing the Taliban through a very different world in which we are all engaging in, which is digitally. The Taliban can no longer neglect and they might be able to force down or shut down the voices of women on the ground in Afghanistan and quiet them down, but they cannot quiet down the hundreds and thousands of Afghan women who are living in the diaspora, who are speaking out every day to make sure that the voices of Afghan women are heard. And the Taliban cannot afford to not listen to those voices. So the power of media and technology is a strong one to remember, that the plight of Afghan women is using this new tool to continue its work. And we also know that the future of Afghanistan and the Afghan people is unknown. It's very unpredictable. We don't know what will happen to our country and our people. But one thing that I want to leave you with is the power and the force of Afghan women, as quiet and as immobile and as powerless they may seem under the burqas, the very striking images that we see. As an Afghan woman myself, I believe in the power of Afghan women, because the future of Afghanistan does, and it will depend on the activity of Afghan women, even if they have to do it under the burqa. So I leave you with this positive note to not give up hope. There's plenty of us out there, and until we're alive, we'll continue fighting this cause. It's one out of many globally, but I'm so thankful to have friends and supporters like you who listen to us, who give us the platform. And I'm so happy to know that I have so many sisters who can speak on our own behalf and not be spoken on behalf of, like we had to 25 years ago. So thank you, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss more.
Thank you so much. So appreciate your life before now, and I know you're going to do great things from now on as well. So thank you for being here. I'm going to move on quickly to our next presenter. Our next guest hardly needs an introduction. Her work as a feminist activist is legendary. She's improved the lives of countless women and girls. As the founder and president of the Feminist Majority and the Feminist Majority Foundation, and former 3-time president of National Organization for Women. Eleanor Smeal has led efforts for the economic, political, and social equality and empowerment of women worldwide for over 4 decades. She has been an activist leader in the passage of landmark legislation, which I'm not going to go through now in the interest of time. I'd rather hear her talk. She's led the fight for the ratification of the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, and is currently working to get the ERA published in the US Constitution. She's known as a political analyst, strategist, and grassroots organizer. Ms. Smeal has played a pivotal role in defining the debate, developing the strategies, and charting the direction of the modern day women's movement in the United States. She was the first to identify the gender gap, the difference in the way women and men vote, and popularized its usage in election and polling analyses to enhance women's voting clout. In October 2015, Smeal and her achievements were honored as she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Here we have National Women's Hall of Famer, Ellie Smeal. Thanks, Ellie, for being here.
Am I unmuted? I think
There
I
you
am.
are. Good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And I'm very happy to see Rangina again. I'm glad she's here and safe. And we work together, and I'm sure we will continue. I'm trying to figure out how you say in this short of time. We've been involved in Afghanistan since 1997, almost 25 years. And we started because it was right after, I want to put us into this. It was right after the Fourth Women's Conference for the United Nations, the famous conference that declared women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And then within a very short time of that, 1996, in fact, well, they took over, the Taliban took over Herat in 1994, 1996, they took over Kabul, they took over the country. And they started to issue these edicts that women couldn't go to school anymore, not from the beginning, kindergarten, all the way through college, couldn't go to school, could not be employed for pay, could not travel without the close accompaniment of a male family relative, could not, I can go on in the could nots. Essentially, they closed them down, told them how to wear dress. They even said things like they could not wear white socks. They could not have their shoes make any noise. So they were covered from head to toe. And in such a way, the windows were painted on like a cab or something so you couldn't see in. But there also, the bottom floors were told to be painted so they couldn't see out. I mean, never have almost all basic human rights been taken off, just destroyed by half the population. And nobody was saying anything. It was little AP stories and it was driving me nuts. So we decided to do some research because we thought maybe it's all exaggerated. Doesn't probably, I mean, you know, how could people live like? So anyway, we went to the State Department. They said it was worse than it was being pictured. We went to the UN. They said the same thing. And everybody started to tell us that, because we said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they said, what are you going to do about it? And it was like, I don't know, it was trying to shut us up, I think. But anyway, you know, we went to human rights organizations, international organizations, met with people from the European Parliament. And finally, we decided we just had to take it on. And we didn't know exactly how to. We were not experienced in international organizing. And we were not particularly adept in international affairs. But somehow, if this could happen in Afghanistan, it could happen anywhere. We were convinced it could happen in a lot of places. And we knew in our own struggle that the progress was slow, far too slow. Anyway, we got involved and we started a campaign that the United States and the UN would not recognize Afghanistan, and we won. We started the campaign in 1997. By March of 1998, the President Clinton and the head of the UN announced in a East Room filled with women to celebrating Women's Equality Day that they would not recognize the Taliban. But that was just the beginning. Then what did we do to help? And we started a scholarship program for women. It's still going on. Afghan women here in the United States. We met with and worked with Afghan women's groups and Afghan women leaders from the beginning. And really, in many ways, they helped guide us. We saw ourselves as people who could maybe influence the American government, maybe the UN, but we knew that we could not do that in Afghanistan. And all we really wanted to do is amplify the voices of women in Afghanistan who were fighting this. And every inch of the way, Afghan women in Afghanistan, there were leaders who wanted to fight for women's equality and rights and saw, frankly, the Taliban as a terrorist group and dictators. After the September 11th and the United States entered, I want you to know that that's not the first time the United States entered. And in fact, one of the things we did, and I think it's very important to do in any project you start, we immersed ourselves in research, what really was happening. And we found that United States helped to entice the Soviets, and this is going way back, but it's all a part of this, to enter Afghanistan and shore up a left-wing leader. This is in the 70s. And I don't know how to fast forward it really, but essentially it resulted in a civil war. We supported groups that were called Mujahideen and that were fighting this left-wing government. And basically the Mujahideen were right-wing forces. And we saw it as a way to hurt the Soviet Union. Some people said it was payback for Vietnam. Some people, a lot of theories. But the reality is the CIA and the ISI of Pakistan were involved. And there was 8 different branches of Mujahideen. One of them was the Taliban. And I'm happy to report the United States government helped them at that time. But basically, what happens is after the Soviets leave and the Soviet Union leaves, a civil war ensued. And the Taliban essentially wins that civil war. And that's when they take over the country completely by 1996. We were involved, and I had to find out why. And basically, you'll never know the answer exactly why. But Unicol, which was a developed oil pipelines, wanted to build an oil pipeline through Afghanistan from the Caspian Sea area, which is very rich in oil, through to Pakistan, and then it goes on to Japan and China. Very profitable thing. We fought that. We fought it because what was that about? It was going to give the Taliban a annual, I'm trying to think of the right word, payoff for allowing them to go through and to keeping it peaceful. In other words, a dictatorship that would not take over the oil interests. So oil plays a part in all of this. And another thing that happened, we found out, is that the Taliban was being enriched another way. And that is they are, Afghanistan still is the major producer of heroin in the world. And so I'm doing this real short, but about $1,000 worth of poppy seeds, once converted and refined into oil, is worth millions on the streets of New York. They produce something like 90%. So when we say we have a drug problem in the United States, some of that's coming from Afghanistan. Nothing is, the world is small, and the trading of money is all intertwined. So that's all going on too. Anyway, from the period of the last 20 years, we have worked with women's rights groups abroad. And I think that what they've accomplished in Afghanistan and what they've accomplished is unbelievable. They had women's rights groups in all 34 provinces. They had a working Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. They had a working Ministry for Women's Affairs. The statistics were probably exaggerated, but about 9 million kids were in school, and about 40% of them were girls. Remember, we were going from 0 under the Taliban, and 25% of the college students. Women were becoming, once again, they were before the Taliban, and they are now, they were in this period, doctors, lawyers, judges, obviously not in large percentages, but still very significant. And those percentages going up. The percentage of women in the government services became 27% when they fell in August of this August 15th, when the country fell. Well, much progress was made. Now, not just for professional women. They always complain that, said that now made most gains for professional women. Frankly, women of all classes and all backgrounds benefited economically from this. And, but anyway, essentially, education was spreading. But one direct way that we were helping in the rural areas is that midwives were trained. They had, at the time of the Taliban, the something like the second highest amount of maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates. Those rates, which were skyrocketed, very, very large, were cut in half. And that helped women everywhere. Obviously, it helped more where there were hospitals, but the midwives also went into rural areas and helped a great deal. I could go on to a lot of different projects that were successful. We want to analyze all of it. What are we doing now? And what is happening now? Rhongina knows firsthand what's happening. And as I said, I'm so grateful that she's safe in the United States now. But women were targeted immediately. And I mean immediately. One of our staff is from Harriet, and her family calls her and says the Taliban are here. They're here. They're right outside our door. It turns out that literally one of the first things they did in Harriet, and we had a front seat picture of it through her constant, thank God for telecommunication and really superior communications of today. The first thing they do is they close down wife abuse shelters. First thing, I mean, you know, you're taking over a big city. You're going to put that on your first list. They threatened to kill all of the workers. God knows what happened to the women. There was wife abuse shelters, just like there is in the United States, all over the country. Those were closed. All women's organizations, the biggest of which was the Afghan Women's Network, were closed. Judges, women judges assassinated. Feminists that were known and they caught, assassinated. It's going on right now. On the beginning of this week, there's protest marches. Women are leading the protest marches. Taliban is not popular. They were protesting for education and employment. There are no jobs, just like Rangina said. The banks have collapsed. And basically, what did they do this week? They took some of the young women, 3 of them, at the, you know, knock on the door, but it was more than a knock on the door. And the leaders, that they slammed the door open, made a commotion at 3 a.m., captured her. We don't know exactly what's happened. Her family is saying that she's being tortured. It's hell. It's very serious. And I think the feminist movement has to defend these women and help them. And they would be us. To do what we do, oh my God, we'd all be murdered. This is a horrible dictatorship. Brutal. So we helped in this last period we helped women escape. We've been working as much as we can on the evacuation, working with the State Department. And basically, the minute this collapse happened, the feminist leaders knew their lives were in danger, and they started immediately to get out. And I could go on all night on the terrible stories. We were up sometimes all night. There's a 9-hour difference, and dear friends that we had been working with were trying to get out, and we were trying to do everything we could to help. Right now, I would say, I don't know the exact numbers that got in the United States, but about 40,000 are still trapped in what are called lily pad countries. In other words, when they took out, you saw the planes leaving, and they might go to some Mideast country, but they ended up landing everywhere. So we have people in Albania, in Poland, in Germany, and they're stuck there. That's the thing that just drives me crazy. Instead of bringing them, we said that we were going to, those who worked with us, those who had been a part of the new Afghanistan, we would help. And they're still working and fighting every day to get in, to get back. One of my, I don't want to go through names because I know you're taping them and I don't want to endanger them any more than they are. But basically, we're doing everything we can to help get those people back into the United States. But that's not
Thanks,
the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I should end.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up there.
Yeah, I want to just say that we have a large role to play. We have a responsibility, and we as feminists should never let anything like this happen. We have got to unite to change our foreign policy, but also right now we got to change immigration rules and regulations so more people can come in. But most importantly, I think that we have to study the situations and figure out what we do to make a strong worldwide feminist movement.
Agreed. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over quickly to Kathy for our next speaker, and stick around, Ellie. We'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end for some questions.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for being here tonight. I am always struck by the myriad ways you have supported and advanced women's rights, not only here in the US, but around the world. Your stories have provided so much background, sobered us, and have provided us with much to think about. At the same time, you have challenged us to commit to doing more. Just to everybody in the audience, remember, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please submit them in the chat field. I have had the pleasure of working for our next speaker for the past several years on the International Rescue Committee's Community Development Committee. I can assure you I have never seen her or her staff busier than in the last 5 months. Harriet Kuhr is the Executive Director of the International Rescue Committee in Charlottesville and Richmond. She joined the IRC in 2004, first working with the IRC in Atlanta, before taking her current position in 2010. A graduate of the University of Virginia, her previous professional experience includes more than 20 years working in the field of international cultural exchange. Harriet, welcome. So glad you can be here with us tonight.
Thank you, Kathy. It's good to see you. I'm gonna share my screen here. I'm gonna take us in a very different direction, but I, as part of this presentation, which is so interesting, I really enjoyed the previous speakers and looking forward to the next. Just real quickly on what's happening in Charlottesville, because as Kathy mentioned, this is, let's see if I can get this into slideshow without messing anything up. There we go. We're really grateful to be doing this work, but it has turned everything on end for us. It's just tossed our lives up. So it's been pretty absorbing. So let's just go through this real quickly. So the effort to evacuate US citizens, green card holders, and our allies was called Operation Allies Refuge. And this is like the iconic picture I'm sure you've all seen. But it was a pretty short-lived operation, right? If you remember, you know, in about a month's time, about 80,000 Afghans, and this is in it, 80,000 Afghans were airlifted out. About 65,000 came here. The others went to as you heard, the infamous lily pads overseas, where most of them still are. And then the evacuees were processed through and sent to military sites across the country called the safe havens, where they were kind of processed for participation in the resettlement program. And then it converted to Operation Allies Welcome, which was the kind of relocation and resettlement piece. So basically the U.S. resettlement network, which is in 49, I guess we're in 49 of the 50 states. And the network was basically asked to try and find space to take in, well, 50, 60,000 people. So that was a big effort, because keeping in mind that the capacity of the U.S. in refugee resettlement had been severely compromised during the last administration, but we had reduced capacity by about a third. A lot of offices had shut down, but we really have been stretching. And Charlottesville here, we were given sort of a goal number of people we could resettle, which is 250 people. That's 250 Afghans, which is the number of refugees we usually resettle in a full year. And keeping in mind that the 250 Afghans is in addition to our regular refugees who are still coming too. So what happened to us here is we said we would take people in, and then about of those people, 200 people arrived pretty much in 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks in October, all at once. And we've had additional people coming in. We currently have received 327 Afghans in Charlottesville, basically in 3 months, from October through the end of the year. We're pretty much stopped. And it was 108 cases, but it's about 90 family groups. And I think the important thing to keep in mind about this number 327, just to reiterate, is that's 327 people in 3 months, which is more people than we have ever resettled in a year in Charlottesville over a 12-month period. So it's pretty dramatic for us. And just to accommodate all those people coming at once, we booked up, we kind of put a lot of people in Charlottesville. We ended up placing people in hotels in Ruckersville and Waynesboro as well. The end of football season helped a lot with hotels. So we have pretty much pulled people back to Charlottesville, except the people in Waynesboro are ones who are planning to stay there. So I think that just to kind of talk about the challenges from our point of view, is recognizing that I've realized that most people think of refugee resettlement as sort of emergency work, but it is not. It's a very slow, planned out process. People are often displaced in refugee camps or in other urban settings for many, many, many years before they eventually get to the US. It's actually a very slow kind of thing. But this isn't really a refugee resettlement effort. It's an emergency response is what we've learned. And so what we are, the State Department kind of stood up a parallel program to refugee resettlement. We are providing the people coming to us with the same services as we do to refugees, but often with very little advance notice, and very frequently as people were coming, especially at the beginning, we would find out the day before they were coming. And there were several times where I actually got calls on my cell phone and said, someone's will be there in 2 hours. That kind of thing was happening. So this is, and part of the need is, in order to respond to that, we need to staff up and add in trained staff, which of course, any of you who have worked with staff know that it's actually a very long, it's not fast to hire people on and get them trained up. And just recognizing that our communities are being pushed beyond our usual capacity. The big challenge in Charlottesville is affordable housing and rental housing, but it's not just, the pressure is not just on IRC, it's also on our community partners. The UVA International Family Medicine Clinic, which usually sees our clients is unable to take in anyone else. The schools are under, pressure to take in so many students at the same time. Social services is very backed up. So those are kind of our pressure points. And then we also want to recognize that the families we're receiving ourselves, that we're receiving now, are have experienced a great deal of very recent and fresh trauma. The way they left their homes so urgently, they don't have long answers for, clear answers for what's going to happen to them. And even as they're coming to us, we're not able to serve them always with the same immediacy as we usually do, just because of volume and the fact that like their paperwork and other things is delayed. And the thing that really is very affecting is everyone is so terrifically concerned about their family and their relatives that they left behind. We have a lot of families who, even when we give them cash assistance for their very basic needs here, we'll take that money and send it back to Afghanistan. So we have families basically taking the money we give them for food, sending it back to Afghanistan, and then seeking assistance from food banks and things like that, because they're rightfully so concerned. And I think it just, we were talking to some of our staff who said that the term they use for like having to go to the Kabul airport and try and get on one of these evacuation flights, they refer to it as the day of judgment. Everyone went and nobody knew, like, it was sort of like who will live and who will die. It was that kind of, and to have had that experience with your kids, all your little kids in tow, is really, really difficult. We're not saying that they're like ruined people or anything, but there's just a lot to work through. So some of our strategies that we're working on is, some of you maybe we are very much interested in groups and organizations that would like to partner with us to sponsor a family, help us find housing, provide volunteers, kind of take on befriending a specific family. And we have a special program that does that. We're also trying to widen our usual geographic scope and to place people into some of the surrounding communities. This is not turning out to be all that successful. Unfortunately, we have people in a lot of these communities that really want families, and our Afghan families are very uncomfortable being separated from their friends and the people they know here. So that one's been a little bit tentative, but if anybody wants to go to Lynchburg, there's a house and a car waiting for them if they want to go. We're trying very hard to reach out to housing providers, individual homeowners. It's a challenge sometimes to find housing for refugees, because we're asking people to rent an apartment to someone with no job, no income, no credit history. Even though we kind of stand behind them, it can be a little bit of a challenge. And obviously we have been securing quite a lot of both public and private funding to allow us to maintain and support the families for a length of time until they are able to really get into a more permanent housing and get jobs and start to become self-sufficient. Those are our areas of focus. So that's all. I just wanted to run through that real quick. And I think, there we go. As far as the families, what I can just share quickly about the families that are here with us, we didn't really know who was coming to us, and thought possibly that we had been working along a lot with SIVs, a lot of them were like the translators and the interpreters who worked with the military, and we have a lot of, I think, families coming now who are from more rural provinces, not as educated, people who were, I think, working in various capacities with Americans or who had family members here. And it's just a different kind of group we're working with. And we also are very cognizant of the special issues and concerns about working with women who are not accustomed to, I think especially some of these rural women who are not accustomed to being that much outside of the home, or certainly never thought about working outside the home. We're trying to, I think that's a topic for another day, but kind of some of the programs we're trying to work on and find things they can work, work they can take in at home and things like that. We're really trying to develop some special programming for that. But that's, first we got to get people homes and settled and the kids in school, and then we'll kind of move on. And that's, I don't want to take up any more time, but I think we can come back if people are interested. We can talk during the question session. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Harriet, for being here with us today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for all the work you do. I know you've also worked closely with our next set of speakers, the Afghan Student Association. We actually are fortunate enough to have two members of the organization, two leaders, Rhongina Hamadi and Vice President Nicola Luinab, to share some of the work that the ASA does at UVA and in the broader Charlottesville community. So the Afghan Student Association, as they'll tell you, is a cultural organization created to promote awareness of Afghan culture at the University of Virginia, as well as to aid Afghan students while they attend the university. They also aim to work cohesively with other organizations in Charlottesville and bring together Afghans in the Charlottesville community. And I know they've done remarkable work in the past couple months, and I'm really grateful to them for making time for us today.
Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rhongina. I'm Secretary of Afghan Student Association.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicola Luinab. I'm a third-year undergrad student at UVA, and I'm double majoring in biology and Middle Eastern studies. I'm also a part of the Afghan diaspora, and although I've never been to Afghanistan, I'm very in touch with my cultural side and cultural background. I'm the Vice President of Afghan Student Association and External Relations Chair of Persian Cultural Society at UVA. In the future, I hope to pursue a future in either reproductive endocrinology or gynecology, and hopefully one day I will be able to visit Afghanistan and practice medicine there, and even push for better and more accessible healthcare for Afghan women.
I guess I should also give a little bit of background about myself. I'm a first generation fourth year nursing student. And as I said, I am the Secretary of Afghan Student Association. I'm also co-president of Perennials for Patients. And I work on a research study involving patients with end-stage renal disease. And a little fun fact was that I was selected to represent the Afghanistan women's national soccer team in 2018. And following graduation, I hope to pursue a career as a labor and delivery nurse. And hopefully with these skills, I plan to aid the extensive Afghan refugee population in the DC area. And so here's a little bit of information regarding Afghan women through history. I know that the previous speakers have already touched on this a little bit, but I'm a very visual person, so I find that it helps to read along. And as I move through this presentation, it's important to know that there isn't a lot of accessible, unbiased information regarding Afghanistan and the United States. And we're told stories by family members and trusted individuals who lived through this themselves. And so prior to the rule of the Mujahideen and the Taliban, women in rural Afghanistan followed gender roles rooted in patriarchy, whereas modernized efforts were based in Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan. And historically, the honor of the family, the tribe, and ultimately the nation is invested in women. And so in rural Afghanistan, tribal community leaders would prioritize their patriarchal laws over Islamic and constitutional laws in deciding gender roles. So therefore, marriages were viewed as an alliance between groups, and women were pawned into these marriages, and they weren't allowed to divorce. And so they were also expected to be obedient to their husband and his family, and they did not have the ability to get any formal education and were essentially voiceless. And so the issue of women's rights in Afghanistan has been historically constrained by the patriarchal nature of gender and social relations deeply embedded in traditional communities, the existence of a weak central state that has been unable to implement modernizing programs and goals due to like tribal feudalism, and foreign interference dating back to the 17th century by the British, Soviet Union, and the United States. This critically impeded social development in Afghanistan. And so by the 20th century, the monarchy was working toward liberating women from the tribal cultural norms. So education for girls was encouraged. They were informed that Islam did not require women to cover their bodies or wear any special kind of veil. It was declared a voluntary option. Women became active government officials, teachers, doctors, and nurses, and they were given the right to vote. And so fast forward to 1992, after the Soviets invaded and left Afghanistan, the Mujahideen took over. And so women were forced to wear the burqa. University and library and schools were burnt down, and there were plenty of stories of physical brutalities against women as well. And so the Taliban, supported by foreign powers such as United States, Pakistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, women were no longer able to go outside except to buy food, and they had to be accompanied by a male relative. And women are forced to wear the burqa and aren't allowed to wear makeup or fancy shoes. Women couldn't go to school nor visit male doctors, and forced marriages and sexual assaults were very evident. And so as we move towards present day, it's hard to understand the Taliban's current rules due to censored media, but we expect women face the same brutality. It's important to understand, and I cannot say this enough, the Taliban's ideologies are very flawed and they do not reflect Islamic values at all. And so we touched base on this earlier, but women in media, such as advocates and journalists, are targeted, and women are unable to play sports. I am relieved to say that the Afghanistan women's national soccer team managed to escape and seek refuge after they were targeted. So I'm very grateful for that. So on to you, Nayla.
So I just wanted to touch base on a little bit of our efforts as ASA at UVA, so Afghan Student Association at UVA. Last semester, we held 2 local rallies for Ban the Taliban and Save Afghanistan in downtown mall and from the corner to the rotunda. We were amazed at the support that we got just from local Afghans as well as just people from the community. So our main goal was to raise awareness about the ongoing humanitarian crisis that the Afghan people were and are facing, as well as creating a safe space for the grieving Afghans of the diaspora to come together, to continue resisting and to grieve together. Also, we wanted to, at the time, and although we are still resisting, we wanted to push for Congress to take action, and we obviously did not see that happen. But a very important thing for us was to show that we are still amplifying the voices of other Afghans in Afghanistan. And another major goal for us was to specifically raise awareness about the injustices that women and children and girls in particular have had to endure in the past during the Taliban regime. So we had a few guest speakers talk about that. We also have monetary donations sent to our Venmo and our GoFundMe. So we've been successful in raising about, I believe, like in total around $4,000 last semester. And all of this money went into helping the refugee families that we were put into contact with just through like Afghan families in the Charlottesville area. And we also held a few donation drives to help like provide basic necessities and clothes and is really everything that the Charlottesville community donated back to these refugees. And we also held a panel conversation with the Afghan on Afghan geopolitical history and culture, led by Dr. Helena Zawahiri. And just to wrap it up a little bit, we wanted to also talk about things that we can do moving forward. I've been in contact with a few of the families here in Charlottesville that have been relocated, and a lot of them, a lot of them are SIV holders, but many of the women do not have like a background in speaking English or a strong background in education, really. But we wanted to just provide some different ideas and also send an Excel sheet in here to see if anybody would be interested in volunteering in the future. So first is Sola Usa, and it's a online tutoring service run by 2 Afghan college students, and it offers a tutoring service to Afghan women that are in Afghanistan and also being relocated to other parts of the world now, to help them prepare for their TOEFL exams. We also wanted to start a free volunteer local tutoring service here in Charlottesville, specifically for the Afghan women, in various subjects, of course. And we're also starting a conversation corner with the ISCV mosque downtown Charlottesville. So we wanted to incorporate arts and crafts and story times and also tutoring and other express interests of the kids into the conversation corner. And lastly, we're also starting a transportation service. So at the ISCV, we have this room that we're holding all of the donations in. We're so blessed to have so many generous people in the Charlottesville community donating all these things. So we wanted to also provide the Afghan women and the families a service to allow for them to go to the room at the mosque and choose the donation items and necessities and everything for themselves and their families on their own terms. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you both and to your entire organization for all the work you've done. I've been fortunate enough to witness it and participate in any way that I can with you all. And it's been truly remarkable to see the way they've mobilized and really gotten support from the UVA community. But I know it's an extremely difficult time, and your work is really instrumental here. So we appreciate it. And I know we've hit 8:30. So for those of you who have to leave us, that is totally fine. But if anyone has any questions, you can drop them in the chat and maybe we can take just an additional 4 minutes to answer a question if anyone has one. Yes, Charlotte.
I just wanted to ask if the Afghan Student Association could, I saw a lot of resources on those slides. Could you drop those in the chat or maybe email your presentation to us so that we could send those resources out for people?
Yes, for sure. I'll consolidate it and add links to the actual places as well, and I'll send it over to Kristen.
Thank you. Okay, Kristen.
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question for any of our speakers if they're not in the chat yet. And that is, I'm really curious about what a feminist foreign policy might look like, what an approach to Afghanistan and Afghan women might look like if the US keeps that population in mind in guiding its actions. And then secondly, how should we approach conversations about Afghan women without treating them as a monolith, but recognizing that they might have divergent interests and identities? So anyone who'd like to respond?
If I may, Kristen, those were very important questions, and that is one of the major takeaways of my personal experience of being on the ground in Afghanistan for 20 years, is that Afghan women are not a monolith. There are a variety of difference of opinions, beliefs, ideologies, experiences. And so while, yes, we are all fighting a common cause, politically, both nationally in the country as well as internationally, to make sure that we have our voice and our autonomy is not ignored. And thanks to the work of Eleanor Smeal and now, when I was at UVA, and I'm so happy to see ASA students. I used to be the president, so if you look in your records, you're talking to your old ASA president in Charlottesville. I remember being actively involved in the campaigns that now was doing for Afghan women at the time, but we've come such a long way, and yet we have such a long way to go. What will happen to Afghan women is a very difficult question or question to answer at this point. And as Ellie said, we don't know what the policy of America will be or what policy that they will take, particularly the US government. But the one thing that we cannot afford to do is to remain quiet and let policymakers make a decision without including women when they've consistently used our bodies, used our agencies, used our name to get their policies across. And I'm actually, personally very angry at the US government, to be quite honest, because they used our agency as Afghan women in 2001 to go and free us from the Taliban. And yet that same, those same elements turned us back over to the Taliban, 20 years later. And it just shows that America's mission about not wanting to build a government, many leaders in American government in the past 20 years have clearly stated that America was not in Afghanistan to do any nation building. They were there to hunt down the Taliban, to hunt down terrorists. And when they did, and the abrupt and the ill-coordinated and or very bad strategic pullout that America engaged in 5 months ago, they proved their point that they were not there to do nation building. And so what we women must collectively learn from such experiences, and I wish Afghanistan was the only and the last one. As we know, there's women's movements or women across the world, whether it's Syria or Iraq or Egypt, for in other parts of the world, women's agencies have historically been used and abused by male politicians to get their agendas across. And then when they're done, they just throw us like that. And I think it's critically important to get more women in position powers, because I think if a woman was leading, the White House instead of Trump, the decisions about Afghanistan would not have been the one that we've witnessed. So it's important to have women in power positions to make wiser and better decisions, whether it's in a broken country like Afghanistan or the world power of America as we know it. Keep the work hard, keep it moving. It's never enough. We must continue to work hard to bring more women to power, because women are better peacemakers than men. And I'll just stop there because I'm getting emotional about this.
We agree.
I was going to say, I agree, want to underline it. And I recommend that people read a study from Brown University on where the money went. It is shocking how much went to the military contractors who provided the weapons and the bombs and the blah, 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 and that they charged obscene prices. I think there's a lot to learn so that we never do this again this way. But and I think the women's movement tried very hard to establish, I'm talking about the women's movement here, but the women's movement in Afghanistan, they were everywhere. There's so many women's groups, and to think they come in and they close them all. I don't blame you, Rangina, for being mad. I think that we have to study as much as we can to figure out how in the world all of us in each of our different roles we play could, what can we do? But I do think that that study opened my eyes. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. By the way, we tried to make, I mean, when I say we, I really should say the feminist movement in Afghanistan was everywhere. They were in so many diversified ways. But it collapsed, and now we have to, but we bear responsibility as citizens of the world and citizens and feminists to figure out how do we build it stronger so that nothing like this ever happens again, or that we have a better way of handling it. And by the way, I was in another thing where they talked about how terrible Syria is right now, and Yemen. So many hellhole, I mean, so much pain.
Thank you both for your responses. We have learned so much from you, from all of you tonight. And we have work to do, clearly, here and everywhere. But Charlotte, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have any last minute announcements?
Thanks, Kristen. I so appreciate your effort in putting this program together. Thanks to Rangina and Ellie and Harriet. And I'm sorry I don't have your names on the tip of my tongue, from the Afghan Student Association, Rhongina and Sabrina, for being here tonight. So appreciate you taking your time. I know you're all busy people to do this, and hopefully shed some light on the situation that will enable people to take some action in their own lives to make a difference.